Good afternoon. My name's Ithier Kiros. I belong to the Passive House platform, and I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon to moderate this short Q&A session for the first block in today's session. I would like to start, as always, by thanking everyone sincerely for following us via streaming in this 12th Spanish Passive House conference. And I think it's going to be tremendously interesting. I would also like to thank the speakers that are accompanying us as well, because they've presented some very interesting ideas and reflections about Passive House in the education sphere. And I'm now going to start with questions that have arisen in the platform via the chat or that have come in the course of the conference and the presentations. And I'd like to encourage everyone that's listening in and following us online to send any questions. Daniel Sanchez, the technician of the platform, we're going to begin with you. You started this block by talking about that insight into the monitoring study in schools. It was very interesting. I've got two questions for you. The first question is about the unique feature in terms of the usage profile of schools, something that we've all of the speakers have actually touched upon in the presentations, and also the question of climate, that difference between the start of classes with low temperatures but acceptable CO2 levels, and as classes progress, then the temperature improves, but in contrast, the CO2 levels shoot up. These type of peaks, is this also something that you will find not only in cold climates, but also in warmer climates as well? Is this also something that's reflected in the study somehow? And also another question about the background. The study that you made, given this very precise diagnosis, what are the next steps that you have to take into account in order to move towards a solution? Okay, good afternoon to you all. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to all of the colleagues that are connected. To answer the question, well, this is something that's reflected in all of the graphs. In warmer climates, particularly in periods in which there are more moderate temperatures on the exterior, well, this can be mitigated substantially by maintaining the windows open for a longer time. And these patterns or trends are perhaps not as exaggerated, but the trend or that pattern is always there, even in cooler months. You know, although we live in a country where the temperatures are, are rather warmer, this pattern is repeated, So we can see what happens with the increase in CO2 levels. And as regards the second question, that's a question about the future. Well, the aim of the study was to get a snapshot of a reality of the real situation in schools in a given area. For some time, we were unable to measure this very easily. And I think that this is something that's been very evident and revealed through the study. The study didn't pursue, the aim of the study was not to sort of complain about the situation. The idea was more to be able to preempt these situations and improve conditions in schools. We didn't want to try to identify the worst situation and pinpoint any specific schools, but actually try to improve infrastructures. We weren't focusing in on a given school or management of any school, etc. And look at how those structures could be improved and present any suggestions and recommendations to the administrations. In fact, the school has also the administration has a program which is also going to extend to other regions in Spain. We'll be presenting this study to other regions in Spain and looking at other studies that we can carry out, very similar to the ones that we saw with Michel and Martin. Thank you very much. Okay, to continue with monitoring, the final presentation that was given by Alex Sanchez from Senda. Well, you talked about two interesting monitoring exercises. In addition to measuring comfort, you also talked about performance, about how this can have an impact on our relaxation, on our rest, and the way we get up in the next day. And I'd just like to ask you two questions. First of all, I'd like to ask if this increase in performance when the participants were provided with ventilation in their rooms, whether that performance, those results could be measured in any way, or whether this was just a subjective observation that they felt more relaxed. And the second question, which has come through the chat, is whether Sender plans to extend these studies or, dig deeper into this area of study. Well, thank you very much, Ithia, for that question. First and foremost, I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to congratulate the entire team for giving shape and form to this Congress, to this conference. To answer the first question, in the different studies, well, in the second study, you saw that an analysis was performed of participants that slept with a ventilation system and also those that didn't have ventilation systems. What we did was carry out specific tests, numerical tests, for example, and also reasoning tests to identify their reaction and their ability or their capacity to wake up. Additionally, we analyzed the more perceptive concepts regarding the sensations they felt of these conditions. The idea was to measure their performance when waking up the next day based on those variables. And as regards the second question, well, the first of these studies was carried out by Bart Kremers, who's one of our colleagues in Holland, and they'd already mentioned that this was subsequently carried out with a university student in Holland. These studies are available to everyone. They're very, very interested. They're very interesting. As Daniel mentioned, in relation to the Stram-Jensen study, the idea was or Bart Kremers, sorry, in the Netherlands, the idea was to improve indoor air quality to ensure maximum health levels. Thanks to these type of studies, well, greater knowledge is acquired, and I'm sure that we'll have more complete studies in the future. Thank you very much. Well, we'll be delighted to listen to what you have to say. Well, now that we have the problem clear with the results of those two studies, we can now move on to the proposals to improve solutions. And along these lines, that was the presentation given by Michel Wassouf and Martina Amado of Energy House, who talked about their experience with a school. Michel, you mentioned in your presentation, well, you presented a lot of data that you'd compiled. Some of the results were very good, others were improvable. And you also mentioned that this may have been because, in the case of the worst results, that was because solar protection hadn't been adequately installed. Or in other cases, for example, the underfloor cooling was not operative because the work hadn't been completed. In these type of studies, is it reasonable to consider this on a step-by-step phase approach, or are these such complex projects that it's very difficult to guarantee correct operation until everything is complete? Yes, I do think it's viable to do a step-by-step approach in these cases because many town and city councils, particularly smaller town councils, don't have such large budgets to address this challenge, for example, of obtaining €1 million or something. Although that may not seem very much in Central Europe, but in our country it is. We presented this project in different town and city councils, in town councils in Catalonia. And it's very difficult to get a town council to go down that road. And you can imagine what it's like today with COVID-19. Well, they're much more sensitive to these type of investments, but they are perfectly viable, starting with thermal insulation. Then this next step would be to install new carpentry, new windows, new ventilation, double flow. Although it's true, to achieve the ENERFIT or passive house levels, to be able to certify buildings, we did observe that in the Mediterranean, it's essential to have an active cooling system and also a dehumidification system, which would be the final step, which is something that was considered there. Okay, brilliant, Michel. Thank you very much, because I do believe it's very interesting from the perspective of the administrative authorities to adopt this very much on a step-by approach. We'd like to know if you have the calculation with Enefit Plus. And also the question about natural ventilation, automatic ventilation, or whether you would like to trust in these people in the schools to carry this out.
Sorry. Yeah, with respect to the second question about Energy Plus, yes, I'd like to say that the last slide that I was showing you about the behavior of the building once the direct expansion batteries are installed, the behavior was followed up, but we didn't do the modeling of the building, of the whole building. We did a model of the least favorable part, but we didn't do a complete model with the Energy Plus system. But I don't think that the results would be terribly different anyway. I think they would be very similar to the multi-zone test. And with respect to natural window ventilation, I think that this is an aspect that was a mistake that we made during the design, because we met with the city council architect. We wanted the windows to open automatically, and they told us that it couldn't be like that. They had to be manually. But Michelle and I said that it was difficult because also one of the orderlies and the staff, maintenance staff at the school said that they would not open the windows, that they refused to do so. So that's what we learned about this. Maybe we should think about free cooling and of a different way of installing ventilation, or using domotics for window opening. Could that be another solution? But we basically did not do that. Yes, but it's all really good to share things that you decide to do in one way, and then after implementation you decide it would have been better to do it in a different way. And if we go on with success stories, the presentation about the 2 schools in Germany that Ludwig Rongen told us about was very exciting, I must say. First of all, I have to say that I felt really envious and jealous about the state grants, state subsidies for renovation, for passive house certification, which shows how institutions, public institutions, can be involved in the process. And I would like to ask you 2 questions about 2 things that we haven't heard about before. The design of the yards and how important it is to look for natural light. You were talking about light comfort. I presume that it has to do because of the way we use school buildings, also because we want to reduce energy consumption when it comes to artificial lighting of buildings. So save on artificial lighting. I also enjoyed very much what you said about the visible ventilation piping tubes to make people aware, or train both teachers and students about what is going on, saying that the infrastructure itself is also a way of teaching others. So how did you develop this idea and implement it? And did you get any feedback? Did these actual teachings you had in mind happen? Did people, teachers and students, learn from it?
Yes, I think the pupils did learn from it, and the state grant, the huge state grant, was a result of great achievement and a great challenge, because we decided for special design, and that was not so easy to realize that design thermal bridge free, because in the case of the first school, we decided for different sizes of plates for the facade and also different colors. And so the state or the government of North Rhine-Westphalia, they demanded to achieve certified passive house for all sections of the buildings. It was important and was necessary to reach the certification. Otherwise, we would not have got the grant, and so it was not so easy to realize that project, but we made different workshops for the crafts and for the involved people. And it was also what you asked, did the pupils learn from it, or did the teachers learn from it? It was also asked by the government of North Rhine-Westphalia that they made a lot of publications about that project. So they involved different newspapers, different magazines, and also the TV, and the Northern Westphalia government also supported to public the results. That was what they demanded for the grant, and because of that they got a grant. But normally in that case it was not possible to get the grant in the beginning because they did not fit in the program. But the government decided to change the program to give the city of Baswell that huge grant of around 4.8 million euros. And what was the second question? Did you have another question, or is it okay?
I think you've replied to both of them, actually. Yes, because you're not only the teachers and students learned, but society at large also learned from this project, didn't they?
Yes.
And I would like to ask you very quickly another question, because Wolfgang Werther asked you this question. They're saying that whether for the design of this building, have you used PHPP, or have you also used other simulation programs?
We've used PHPP, only PHPP, and the specialist engineers, they made short monitoring, and they used their special programs to do it. The result of the monitoring after the first year was that the temperature was always as we wished, and absolutely independent from the outside temperature. The inside temperature was always in a very comfortable level. And another result of the monitoring was that the CO2 concentration was very, very low. Also in the case of the double numbers of pupils, we had CO2 concentration of around 400 to 500 parcel per million, ppm. And, in Germany, the level should be in schools less than 1,500. And in one case, we had the measurement was around 800 to 900 ppm. But it was because that we made the building construction during operation, so that the pupils in one class, sometimes we had pupils from two classes in one room. So the CO2 concentration increased of around 900 ppm. Was also very, very low. That was the result of the monitoring during the first and the second winter time.
Thank you, Ludwig.
Okay, you're welcome.
And finally, we're going to move on to Jonathan Hines' presentation from Archetype in the UK, who focused more on the process, didn't he? On changing the culture, the design culture, the building culture that is required by Passive House. The question I'm going to convey to you is along those lines. You insist a lot in your presentation in the important the change mindset in design and others. Do you also target it towards the user? That is to say, the person that is going to live in those educational Passive House buildings?
Yeah, we do. Obviously, it's really important that the occupants of the building understand how the building works, generally in terms of Passive House, and how it works specifically in terms of controls. I mean, we find that actually Passive House tends to have simpler systems and simpler controls, but it does require people to understand how to operate those. So we do a lot of work with the users. We do some introductory training sessions. We produce little handbooks that tell them what to do. And on one of our school projects, we actually got the children to make a video themselves, which explained how the building works for the rest of the school and for future pupils and teachers after they've left the school. And that's a really lovely video. It's probably one of the best explanations of Passive House I've ever seen. To actually hear it in the words of children instead of us architects and engineers just brings it down to the basics that everybody understands. So yeah, absolutely essential that we work with everybody, the design team, the contractor, the builder, and the users, to realise that Passive House is different, but it's not overcomplicated. If you get it right, it's actually simpler, but you just need to appreciate how it works.
I love the idea because this links very well with the final Swedish proverb that Ludwig told us, that the classroom is also a teacher for the children. And it's also important because it relates to what Martin said of involving users in the process. Yes, we've only got 3 minutes left. And I'd like to take this time to ask a general question and just tell us in a sentence, in a headline, so to speak, what is happening now. As you know, with the pandemic, COVID-19, many of the topics that we're talking about today are being talked about: air quality, ventilation, educational spaces where children spend so long and so many hours. Do you think that this media interest, where all of these ideas are being talked about, are an opportunity? Or do you think they have the dark side, which can lead us to have a confused debate? Michelle, what do you think about this? Well, yes. I also think that is a wonderful opportunity. And I think that we have to grab the moment and take our politicians by the hand and put pressure on them so that they move towards the Passive House solution. Danielle, what do you think? I totally agree with Michelle. And in fact, I think we have to understand this moment as a time of increasing awareness of the population and politicians. BEP, with their study, hasn't tried to, jump on the train and take advantage of it. No, we're talking about a basic problem, and now we are at an emergency situation. But once the emergency is over, there's a background problem there, and we have to sort it out. Martin. Yes, I also agree with what Michelle and Danielle were saying. This study was made when it had to be made, and unfortunately it's coincided with COVID-19. But thanks to this study, I think that we are at a very good time to make the society become involved in this process. Jonathan, what do you think about this time?
Yeah, I think there's such a big interest and focus in ventilation. Passive House is a really good response to that. I'm also finding that people are even more focused on focusing on a zero carbon future as a sort of good recovery out of COVID. So it's a win-win positive.
Alex. I'd like to say that I agree with the speakers who have preceded me. And yes, of course, I think it is an opportunity for us. We are before a very awkward situation, but it also highlights a problem that was hidden away. And now we have the opportunity of making it visible and everybody becoming aware of what it is and how it's happening. Ludwig.
There's no doubt for me. Permanently fresh air supply is the best what we can do against COVID-19. And the Chinese ask us every day, when can you come next time to China? We need passive houses more and more because we have problems with COVID-19. And we see the passive house and we imagine that's what we have to do. It's no question, there's no doubt.
Well, with this fresh air and optimism, it's clear that we need more passive house, and we'll conclude the Q&A session for this section. As you know, we have a short break now. I think it's approximately 5 to 8 minutes, isn't it? And then we'll come back with the next round table, and I do hope that you will continue enjoying your works. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.